and first item, I'll be looking across to my side because I've got two screens running, so I've got the other screen with the agenda on it, if you're wondering why I'm not looking in your direction. So first item on the agenda would be confirmation of the minutes of the meeting from the 27th of November.
March.
That's not right. That is the minutes.
Right. We go here.
Confirmation of the 19th of March. That's better. The minutes okay. No questions, corrections. I'll move that the minutes be received. Oh, sorry, your hand's up because you got a question, or Brian?
My hand's up because I wanted to move it.
Oh, there, I've got to do that, don't I? Yeah, right. Moved Brian, seconded Stuart. All those in favour, we have to put our hand up. Raise hand. Got all that, Karen? Carried. Next item on the agenda is make everything a bit smaller here. The Health and Safety Risk and Major Projects Report, page 16. Alison, did you say you've got to move backwards and forwards across screens?
No, I'm fine because I've got my iPad here, but I'm.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, just a step ahead. I'm fine for today. Yeah.
Right, Christina is here. Do you want to speak to the report, Christina?
Morning, everybody. Thank you for that. As you'll see, our this report, 3 reports merged into one, just due to lack of reporting, and that's probably due to lack of activity that's been happening in the space since we've been basically in lockdown throughout the time that this report was made. So health and safety, we just had one reported event, which has been dealt with by the manager, involving a contractor entering a site without approval. As you know, staff were provided with our COVID-19 protocols during lockdown, and in last week they were also provided with our level 3 guidelines and protocols as well. Throughout this time, the cleaning regime has continued at the head office, and any staff member who was deemed essential and needed to be in the office also needed to be cleaning their own workstations and follow protocols such as wearing masks and following hygiene standards. Those staff working from home, we wanted to keep them comfortable at their desk space, as it's a little bit different to being in the office. So they're provided with ergonomic checklists, and members of our team, management team, have been making contact with our staff just to make sure that they're okay. And the implementation of a buddy system, I think, has been pretty good, just to keep staff in contact with one another. And at the same time, during this, during level 4, a number of us have had to be in our civil defence roles, as well as doing other work. So the rostering system's been in place, and the succession planning has started so that we can look at other people who can take over the civil defence functions, as some of us need to start looking at business as usual. For risk, there's been no changes due to the risk profile. And in the major projects report, you'll see information there, and I think a lot of our project managers have just put that there could be some timing issues due to COVID. Are there any questions?
Brian.
Thanks, Christina, for that. Hey, on page 19, around the Milton Service Centre proposal, it said that there was going to be pricings and an update from 3 different groups coming back early March. Did that happen? And is everything still on track there?
I would have to come back to you with that information, Brian. Sorry, unless Steve, you knew.
No, I don't know a lot about that, other than we were just making contact with them, Your Worship, to just check out on actually where they were. So I think at the moment we are just in a position of probably updating ourselves as to where they are as well. I think we've been concentrating obviously on the community hub related side of things with the applications that we've been dealing with and the tendering processes and things like that. I think Jules had the latest information from his meetings with them, but we will, now that we're sort of level 3 back into normal business, we will check up where that group is going.
Yeah, it's just more around, it's been a long time since I've heard anything back from them, and really like an update on how they're coming on.
I'll make a note to do that.
Thank you.
Michelle.
Just going back on our minutes here, John, Stephen, sorry, was just about the fencing of the ponds. Did we actually get to, and, you know, securing and that, did we actually get that done before we shut everything down, or are we still getting around them?
Steve?
I mean, I haven't been there myself. I can't say directly, councillor. I can say that we passed that, you know, those concerns on. We talked about the lock gates, we talked about the signage, we talked about checking the fencing, and I have said that I am going out, and I've talked to Jules already, and within the next week or so we're going out to personally view all the wastewater plants, and I'll be able to personally confirm those issues.
Okay, thank you.
And Alison.
I just want to ask on the ORC for the Piggydale up at the Rosebank Industrial Park. That's been going for quite some time. How close are we getting to a resolution there?
I'll take that one again, Mr. Chairman. We were pretty close to a resolution prior to lockdown. We had 2 jobs to do after meeting the landowner that was concerned. There were 2 areas that we were looking at it, and I have chased Ian up about that during level 4. One of those areas was just to get a valuation, just a pure valuation of the land that would be potentially turned into, you know, the ponds area. Just value that because it might very well be a much cheaper option just to actually buy at normal valuation that and turn it into a wetland and retire it. So that's what we were looking at. And there was one other thing that we agreed we were doing that Ian's picking up as well. I can't quite recollect it at the moment, but again, moving into level 3, it's about chasing that up. We were questioning whether we could get PGG Wrightson to do the valuation. They couldn't really go out in level 4, but I did chase him up to get that moving. So we'll get an update again shortly.
Okay, thanks for that.
Bruce Fowler.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Just through you, a question for Christina, I think. What proportion of staff, now that we've gone to level 3, what proportion of staff or numbers of staff have gone back and are working in the office and council offices?
So every effort has been made to get our staff working remotely, and I would say that we have in the head office 10 staff working there who need to be there.
Right. And on our service centres and such like? Are staff working from there, or are they still working remotely?
They do have staff working from there, and as I understand, they have working bubbles. So they may have 2 people who are in their bubble and they have the same shifts, and then the next day another bubble will come in. And in between that time, we have the cleaners come in and sanitise the space for the next shift.
Right. Oh, thank you. So good separation then between bubbles and people.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Steve, I have a question. The Urban Seal Extension and the Hina Bridge are both showing, oh, sorry, not the Hina Bridge, but the Urban Seal Extension is showing a potential delays. Oh no, the Hina Bridge has a potential delay because of COVID-19 as well. I'm trying to reconcile that with the government's expectation that local government is going to get out there and really invest in spade ready type projects and that sort of thing.
Yes, well, we, Mr. Chairman, we did apply actually for those 2 projects within the Crown Infrastructure Partnership program. It was one of about 6 projects that we did apply for, and Council has just recently been asked to prioritise those and came up with a listing from 1 to 6. So it was definitely included in that. Obviously, it would be unusual to think that we would be getting successful with all 6, though, Mr. Chairman, to be fair.
Yes, I was thinking about the getting the work done side of it. How do we, you know, we're going to get this extra money, we're encouraged to get debt, and we're still got to get the work done.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, but we're not, I mean, they're only, the Urban Seal Extension one was a budget related issue, not so much a contractor availability issue. And we did get work done within, we broke it up into different areas and was able to approve work that came within budget within other areas, and didn't do the work where it was above budget and brought that back to council in those other areas. So that's definitely happening. The team is all working, you know, in level 3. They've been working level 4, and level 3. The contractors are all out there getting into it. So the issue is potentially, which well, it'll be a backlog issue more than anything else. I don't think it's actually going to be a demand issue initially. It's going to be a supply issue as they get through the backlogs.
Great, thanks. I'm pleased to see the Plantation Heights property sale risk put in there as a new risk. I'm thinking that the consequences of lockdown and COVID-19 and all the economic implications, many of which we're uncertain and unclear of, and plenty of commentators making quite a lot of different guesses about it. I expect as part of your annual plan process, you're making some assumptions and boxing on, and then during the LTP process, hopefully some of our assumptions will get refined as more information comes into this. But I expect probably at our next meeting that we would have a wider discussion on our risks going forward post this event, in terms of financial risks and loss of income from people not paying rates and all those sorts of things. I'm quite comfortable that we're not doing it now because there's so much guessing going on.
Well, just in response to your comment, Mr. Chairman, I know the Mayor's got his hand up too for a question, but just answering you from my perspective anyway, is that in terms of the annual plan, we are producing a decision report to the annual plan, which will be written over the weekend and a few more days after that, which necessarily is making assumptions on revenue impacts. There are some revenue impacts. We're making assumptions on assumptions based on evidence on the changes to interest rates. So that's a factual change. It's actually a positive change overall when we think about the cost of finance and things like that. So that's going to be in there. And then there's also aspects of expenditure savings that will be in the decision report that's estimated as well. So we're doing it in that fashion. To be fair, other than the interest rates factual information we have, the rest of it will be, and I discussed it with John, more along the lines, particularly in the revenue side of things, about we know that there's going to be an impact, so we need to reflect an impact, but let's not be too draconian on the impact because we actually don't know what it's going to be. So it's about reflecting something, Mr. Chairman, but not going so overboard that it has a major rating impact at this point, but just so we can have an idea that we are reflecting something.
Yeah, I think the LTP will be the real reflection of what we understand of it. John, I'm keen on sensitivity analysis when our assumptions are so uncertain that there's perhaps some sort of range of assumptions. Brian, you have a question?
Yeah, around catch-up of projects through you, Mr. Chairman, to Steve. A comment came past to me. You know how March and April is the big months for doing road maintenance and sealing? But the contractor said to me that if we delay it and the ground temperature goes below, he had some ground temperature, you can catch up the projects, but they'll be garbage. We're not going to rush in and catch up our roading projects through the winter at the risk of the quality of the job being a waste of time, are we?
Well, I wouldn't expect so either, Your Worship. You'd expect the technical people that understand construction and the construction season for exactly that. The roading is significantly impacted, isn't it? Not to be making decisions that would be incorrect or imprudent.
Just as long as we keep an eye on that, that'll be great.
Right, no other questions. If I can have a mover and a seconder, please. Thank you, Bruce Fowler. Moved, seconded. Ellison, thank you. All those in favour, raise your hand. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Plenty of hands raised there. All those against, carried. And that takes us to the investment portfolio report. And John, do you want to start and introduce Ben?
Yep. Thank you, Chair. As you can see by the numbers, our return has dropped quite a lot. So we had a 454,000 loss in February and a $2 million loss in March, which has really been caused by the market fluctuations in terms of COVID. There are some reports from NICA themselves, and there's Ben's report, but Ben is online and he's the boffin. So we might defer any questions to him unless you've got questions for me.
We'll go to Ben. Hello, Ben.
Hello. Good to see you all on this new way of meeting. So I produced a report or a letter of 9th April, which I was prepared to talk to, but I'm also happy just to make some general remarks about investment markets, if that would be helpful. I really take direction from you.
Yeah, 9 April's feeling like a long time ago.
It is, yes.
Yeah, so give us an update, please.
Sure. So as John has alluded to, the month of February was pretty bad and the month of March was very, very bad in terms of investment market returns. Markets bottomed on around the 23rd of March, and they've been rising very strongly since then. So taking into account the movements last night, the global equity market is up 28% from its lowest that it reached on the 23rd or the 20th of March or something around then. Now that's a big rise, but it's still some 13% below the peak that it reached in mid-February. So while things have risen quite strongly, it's still somewhat down from where we were at the peak of the market in February. Volatility has decreased since then. Really, the worst was that week around the middle of March. But since then, we've seen very, very strong intervention from central bankers in terms of liquidity support and other actions like that. And along with that, we are seeing the markets start to look through the current terrible news and start to price in some sort of recovery. So while things are still going up, there's the expectation that things are moving through the peak and will be surviving. Now with that said, there's obviously still a lot of uncertainty around, and particularly as places like Europe and the US look to reopen or partially reopen their economies, the big risk is that we see a further increase in COVID cases, which necessitates a further close down. So a lot of uncertainty about the direction that we take from here.
Great, thanks, Ben. I've got a random document on the screen. Has anyone else got that?
I'm Carol's, I think. Carol's computer by the looks of it.
Yeah.
Carol's shared her screen accidentally. We just need to get that off.
Oh, that's better. I can see everyone again. It happened just as I pushed a button and I thought I'd done it. Right. Thank you, Ben. Any questions of Ben? Now I've lost my participants list. Back again. No questions. There's a question. Bruce Wawala.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ben, what's your assessment? There's been we dropped off and towards the end of March, but as you say, it's risen strongly since then again. What's your assessment of the underlying, I guess, strength of the markets or the basis on which those rises have occurred? Is that reasonable, do you think?
I think what we saw in March was that the market was trying to decipher what this event meant. So the markets part of their job is to price the future. And so when there's a lot of uncertainty, that the markets become a lot more wild because they're trying to find a new equilibrium. To point to that, I did a bit of a calculation on the S&P 500, which is the US share market index, and 90% of the time it moves within a band of less than 2%, either plus or minus 2% a day. In the middle of March, it was moving between 5 and 12% for a week and a half. So we had 8 trading days where the market moved either down or up by between 5 and 12%. And what that reflects is extraordinarily uncertainty about the future outcomes. So on one day, the market was pricing in a very, very bad outcome. And on the other day, the market was pricing in a less bad outcome. In the last couple of weeks, we've started to see less of those wild swings, which is an indication that the market has a bit more sort of certainty about the pathway that we can take. But as I alluded to, if we do come out of this period where cases seem to be peaking and perhaps even starting to tail off in the larger markets, if we come out of that period and things immediately take off back again and places like the UK and the US are forced to go into shutdown again, that will lead to further falls in the market. At the moment, the market is sort of pricing in a bad outcome and pretty bad earnings results for 2020. but it's also pricing in a recovery into 2021. Things are changing day to day, so it's very hard to give predictions, but I will point to the IMF, the International Monetary Fund, as a sort of a global respected body that puts out these projections, and they put out projections saying that the global economy would contract by 3% in 2020, and it would rebound by 5.8% in 2021, and that's more or less in line with what most people are calling for the global economy. A pretty severe contraction through this year, but then a rebound into 2021. And now obviously the market is not going to wait until 2021 to start take off again. It's going to try price that in correctly at the current time. I'm sorry, that was a very long answer, and I feel like I didn't really attack your question, but the unfortunate answer is that we don't really know how long this recovery will be sustained or if it will revert.
No, thanks for that, Ben. Yep.
In the article I read this morning on the lift in the share market prices was very predicated on the assumption that around the vaccine. And it seems to me that all of the economic recovery projections are based on assumption of a vaccine in 18 months. And I read another article recently that pointed out that we don't have a vaccine for the common cold yet, or AIDS. So it could be all predicated on a false assumption. But we'll ride with it for now. Right, yeah. John, anything to... Oh, sorry, were you going to say something, Ben?
No, I agree. I mean, at the moment, the market is trying to guess at the route that we take out of here. And given the extreme global consciousness around this disease, the expectation is that this will push a vaccine development. But even if we develop a vaccine within 18 months, that would be extraordinarily quickly. And then we have to roll it out and distribute it around the world. And we also, there's so many unknowns about this virus. Will it mutate? How effective will the vaccine be, et cetera, et cetera. So, I mean, this is all stuff that is known, and the market is trying to guess at what the right answer is. That I posit that if the chance of a vaccine, if an effective vaccine was higher, the market would be a lot higher from here. So the market's trying to balance out where the balance of probabilities, and it might be too optimistic, it might be too pessimistic.
I've got a question from Ken.
Thanks, Stephen. Ben, just to you, look, we're all in this for the long haul. We've decided that long ago. But the most vulnerable part of our investment portfolio, I'd be interested in, and your commentary around that, I guess, and any opportunities emerging and the risk associated with them, perhaps, just so we can get a bit of a gauge on things.
Absolutely. So you invest in a diversified portfolio with Nico, and the portfolio is what we would call a moderate balanced portfolio. So it has about 50% allocated to equities and property and growth assets, and about 50% allocated to bonds and cash. That first group of assets are an order of magnitude more volatile. And the reason you accept that volatility is over the long term, they do provide you with a higher return. So if the most vulnerable part of your portfolio, if you want to think about it that way, will be the equity exposures, because those are the ones that will bounce around from day to day, depending on market news. The bond exposures, so equities broadly, growth assets are about 50% of the portfolio. The bond exposures are not without risk. However, they are much more stable, and you need to think of them as an order of magnitude more stable. In the bond exposure, you have a diversified portfolio of both government, local and credit bonds, and you're diversified across New Zealand and global markets. That doesn't insulate you completely against losses, because the way bond pricing works is that if interest rates rise in the short term, your mark to market prices, you take a capital loss. And the reason to think about that is if you're holding a bond that's yielding this amount and the market moves up to this interest rate, your bond is now less valuable. And so therefore, if you market to market, you take a loss on that bond. But those movements are much, much less volatile compared to the equity part of the portfolio. And then finally, you have the cash part of the portfolio, which is very liquid, very high quality, and there to act as a bit of a ballast. It's not a large allocation because it's doesn't give you much return, but overall has a role to play. In terms of opportunities, I think there's a lot of uncertainty at the moment. In our models, our models are currently looking at the broad picture and are more favorable to markets such as global equities, and within fixed income, high quality corporate bonds. However, we are not making recommendations along those lines at the moment because of the sort of uncertainty. It's very easy to look at market pricing and say, for example, gosh, corporate bonds are now yielding a lot, but we recognize we are sort of heading into uncharted territory, and that pricing represents a higher risk at the current time. So by and large, our clients are staying the course and staying with their diversified portfolios and not trying to stray too far away from their long-term strategy.
Thank you, Ben, and apologies for not putting my video on. I can't get my video working this morning, so, but thank you.
All good, you're here. Brian?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you too, Ben. It's an absolutely impossible situation for you at the moment, and we appreciate the information. One thing that I am conscious of is the amount of scrutiny the public's giving us at the moment, and especially around our reputational risk. Just wondering, with the media not being here, and I noted that in this afternoon's corporate meeting, we've got to be really careful with the messaging at the moment, because I note that it was highlighted in one of our reports that we lost 2,117,000 in March. We've got to be careful with that statement, because that's going to go round our neck for the next couple of years. What actually happened was we made 517,000 for the year. So I'm just wondering, as an organisation, if we can please be very conscious of the messaging we're putting out there and the statements that we're highlighting, because there is a risk that we'll get tagged for this for a long time.
I absolutely agree, and that's a very good point. With this portfolio, despite it being a moderate balanced portfolio, you should still view it with something that has a time horizon of 2 to 3 years at least. And so to be looking at month-to-month performance potentially highlights that month-to-month volatility, which you know you're going to incur with this kind of portfolio. And you do that purposely. You do that purposefully because you accept that the month-to-month volatility is the price you pay for getting that better return over the long term. But you're absolutely right. The media loves to jump on blood, and if they see a negative $2 million thing, that makes a great headline, whereas a headline that says, you know, this portfolio has given you a superior return over the 3 years compared to a bank deposit, that doesn't really sell newspapers.
Yeah, I can already see what will be in tomorrow's paper with this. And there was absolutely no need to put the figure in there. We can read it. We know what happened for the month. So we do need to be really careful at the moment what our messaging is.
John, at our last meeting, you had a report over, since we took that out, since we started investing in the fund, that showed the growth in the fund. We need to keep reporting that.
Okay.
All right, Bruce Fireweller.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Just a comment, really, I'd make sort of along Brian's lines too, is we had a nearly 2% return for the year, for the March year. If we'd put those funds in a very safe bank deposit, I don't imagine we would have got a better return than that anyway. And it'll be interesting to see with the end of the month now, April. I would imagine the next report will show we're perhaps $1 million up on the end of from the end of March. So that's perhaps a bit optimistic, but I will be a lot better off. I'm sure of that at the end of this month. I'm welcome to be contradicted on that, but anyway. And just also a question for again for Ben on page 4 of your report, Ben, that you sent us there. You had some long-term assumptions there. Have you changed? That's about a month old now. Have you got any change on that, on those assumptions, or that you're pretty much holding to those in the meantime?
Can I just jump back to your question on April? Just very roughly, I would expect the portfolio to be up in the order of 6% for the month of April. So it has been a very, very strong month, but I guess we'll have to wait until we've got the numbers, the official numbers from NICO. Yes, so our long-term assumptions, no, they haven't changed since the 1st of April. And the reason is the way we work our assumptions is they are built up from the risk-free rate plus risk premium on top of them. And we take an outlook of 5 to 7 years with that. And so we do look at them at least we do adjust them for the current market levels every 3 months. And if the market changes significantly from where it is, we do look at them immediately and change them. So just to give you a bit of history, the previous time they were set was early January. In the middle of March, when interest rates fell dramatically, we adjusted them again. And then in the first week of April, when markets had stabilized a bit, we adjusted them again. And those are the current assumptions that have been used in that report. We're sort of looking at things since then, but the market hasn't, the interest rate market hasn't moved significantly enough for us to come in out of cycle yet for that, but we are watching that.
Right. And also just a question, there's the graph just at the bottom of that page, or the table, I should say, correlation assumptions. Can you explain that, or do we need to know what that means exactly?
I should explain that. The key, and this goes to an earlier question about the portfolio and the equities and bonds and cash. The key issue for investment portfolios is diversification. And the way you measure diversification is determining how correlated your assets are. So if you have a correlation of 100, that means that those two asset classes will move in the same direction all the time. And if they do move in the same direction all the time, they give you no diversification. So a key assumption that goes into our modeling is how correlated we want to assume asset classes are. And so the Actuarial Society and the professional standards I adhere to require me to put all important assumptions in there, even though there's a lot of numbers in there and it's a bit archaic.
Right, now that's thanks. That explains that. I can make sense of that, understand that now. Thank you.
Yeah.
Right, question from Steve.
Just going back to the question, Mr. Chairman, or the comment about the messaging and how we're describing the information. I mean, looking at the report, and the report doesn't say $2 million. The report says a significant loss. The $2 million was discussed verbally in this process. It does show, as you would expect it to show, in the monthly balances. That's just a figure. So we certainly take on board, and we've done this before, I totally agree that we need to be careful of media and public messaging, but this is the Risk and Assurance Committee also, and it requires to have the information, doesn't it? So you're not suggesting in any way that you don't show the $2 million, I'm sure. And the report itself doesn't say a lot other than a significant loss. So I think we just got to be careful of that balance. We totally accept the media issue and the perception issue, but you still also obviously need the right information to the committee.
Ryan?
Yes, Steve, just for a clarification, it's the front page of our investment portfolio update for this afternoon. There's only 3 lines in it, and 2 of the lines were, note, we've made a $2,117,000 loss for this month. We knew that. It's in the report. We don't need it highlighted so the media can pick up on it and wrap the $2 million around our throats for the next few months. Well, next few years, probably. I'm just conscious of the messaging. We haven't lost $2 million. We've actually made 500,000, and that's what we should be writing in the report. We can work the rest out.
Right, okay, sorry, I was looking at this risk and assurance report. You're talking about the one this afternoon, that's fine.
Yeah, it's, for me, the risk is our reputational risk, and that's why I've brought it up while the media's not here now. If we're going out with information for the public, we've got to be conscious of what the headline is, and the headline today will be $2.1 million loss.
Can I just suggest that when we have that meeting, then that message is highlighted, Your Worship, in public, assuming that there might be media there, that's all, because obviously they're not here now.
Yeah.
Right. No other questions. Thank you, Ben, for helping us out today. If I can have a mover and seconder, please. Moved Brian, seconded Ken, thank you. All those in favour, hands up. All those against, carried. Karen, did you get an email from me?
Sorry, I had
Get an
trouble
email?
unmuting. An email? No. Oh, hang on.
Can you look for that? We'll need that in a minute.
Yep, I have got that. Thank you.
Thank you. Next report on page, scrolling. Still scrolling.
63.
63, thank you. Management accounts. Are you going to present this, John?
Yes, I am, Chair. So the things to note, if we look on page 64, we have, so the rates debtors are down and the NZTA claim hasn't been processed for March. So that's why, compared to the audited numbers, it's 500,000 versus 3 million. And then just as we've been speaking to the item on the Nico portfolio, it's lower than it was at year end. So it's 26.6 mil versus 27.2. If you look at the work in progress line, we've spent nearly 13.5 million on building our assets. So that's the work in progress. The bank overdraft comment actually related to the monthly one in the corporate services one. And if you look at the borrowings, at March, we only had 5 million of our loans for the LGFA, because that 4 million that I did borrow and tell everyone about was in April. So that's the statement of financial position. Are there any questions on that?
No questions?
Okay, on page 65, so this is the income and expenditure report. So if you have a look at overall, our income looks quite a lot lower than the budget, and the main area that's in is on the grants and subsidies, which is about 3.5 million below budget, and that's just the NZTA program timing, and also being hit by the lessened activity during the COVID lockdown period. We are looking good on other fees, which is mainly caused by the Mount Kui revenue flowing through, which is good. And the other gains really is to do with the sale of our property there. But if you have a look at the line interest revenue, you see it's 377. That's a debit as opposed to a credit. That's mainly the reduction or the devaluation in the investment portfolio caused by the COVID market fluctuations. So that's on the revenue side. On the expenditure side, we're not too far out. It's mainly a little bit of over expenditure in the Three Waters operational costs on non-routine maintenance and operations and maintenance sampling and legal fees that we had to do with our court cases. And then timing on the rates in the different portfolios. So I think, and depreciation will be really accurate only at year end when we've capitalized all the assets and done the depreciation. So so technically we have a loss versus a profit, and that's mainly due to the grants income. I'll take questions if there are any.
Yeah, John, I have a question. This says that we've got claims included up to January.
Yeah.
And this is the end of March report.
Yeah.
So why do we not have February claims in here?
I think we were in process of working those things out, and then we had to do all the lockdown stuff. So it's just a timing issue.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. It's just the workload. Yeah.
Yeah. No, it's a big chunk of revenue, and I've worked in other councils where they've let it slip, and it makes a hell of a difference when you're not getting NZTA subsidy.
No, we definitely have an NZTA focus specifically for year end as well.
Cool.
Yeah.
I've got Stuart with his hand up.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Through John, I see there that we're talking about things that we're going to face, and one of the issues was unrecoverable flood costs. Can you give us a couple of examples of what they could be, please?
So if we had some damage done to the infrastructure that wasn't insured, we could have some of that not being recovered because we'll just have to wear the loss. And we've got a schedule on the water side. We've had invoicing from the water people, and I'm looking at that versus what we can claim from insurance. So due to a natural event that we didn't have insurance cover of, or if we had to repair it to a better standard than it was, we wouldn't be able to claim that difference. So that's an example.
Okay.
Yeah. And so all the loss
for civil defence.
at this stage, it's sitting in the water contract, so it's an operational cost, not as in a civil defence. If there's a loss overall, we'll try and we'll allocate it to the activity as opposed to a civil defence loss. Yeah, I don't know if that answered your question, Bruce or Stu. Yeah.
Yeah, Brian.
Yeah, John, talking to other councils, one of the sources of income that you just can't catch up on is the fees and charges that you miss out on. Sam, we were shut down for all of April. Have you got any figure in your head of what hit we've taken on that?
No, not at this stage, Brian.
Right. Do we also have the ability, you know how like we take for the likes of cafes and that, we'll take a 12-month fee off them, and yet they're now only going to be open for 10.5 months. Do we easily have the ability to reimburse them that fee if they weren't open, if we wanted to?
I think what Steve's going to bring through on the annual plan side, we might have to have almost like a financial hardship fund set up, which council would allocate to have stuff offset on, almost like the fees reimbursement side. But and I don't really want to interfere with, say, for example, the commercial rental invoicing or the rates billing. I want to get everyone invoiced, and then if they're battling to pay, then we'll be able to use hopefully some criteria which will say these guys are in hardship and we're going to give them a discount, and the discount will be dependent on certain criteria. So that's where we're thinking of going, but you guys will have to make the decision.
Thank you, John. If there was a chance, if you happen to come across what fees and charges we missed out on for April, if you could throw it through to us, that'll be great, just so that we can quantify what the loss is. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's important we don't get into the discussion of relief and stimulus projects here today, but the financial forecast to year end and the consequences of events is is important to our role here. John.
Yeah, morning everyone. Hey, my question or comment really, John, is on page 65, and it mentions under grants, contributions and sponsorship, and it's got about the West Otago pool, the $64,000. That was West Otago Community Board money. That was nothing to do with council. I was surprised to see it in there. And it should be just slightly better explained with the heading West Otago Community Board money. That wasn't council money. That was project funds from the West Otago Community Board that funded a shortfall in the cash flow there.
Yeah, I think, yes, I think the other, so that's the expense side where it goes through, but at year end, John, we'll have to do the reserve movement. So we haven't reduced the reserves of it. It's just about getting the accounting right within the expenditure category.
Yeah, okay. Look, it surprises me that it's, perhaps it could be just better headed. I mean, that looks like it's $64,000 of council money, that's all. When it's actually...
Okay.
Right, no more questions. The resolution to receive this report. Oh, Steve, you have a question?
Oh, sorry, I just probably make the comment in that page on 63. I think I have said it to some people. I'm not sure if it's been publicly made known, but in terms of the wastewater non-compliance side of things is we do have insurance. So we are being represented legally and we are subject only to very small excess. If we were prosecuted and if there is a penalty imposed on us or a fine imposed on us as a consequence.
Right, mover and seconder. Thank you, Stuart. Thank you, Ken. All those in favour? All those against? Carried. And that takes us to the Treasury Advisory Services report. Welcome, Miles. So I'll start with John, introduce Miles, and let's go.
Yes, thank you, Chair. So here we have Miles, who's the author of the report, and so I think it's best we hand over to him, and if you've got any questions, he should be able to help handle them. Thank you, Miles.
You can hear me all right, can you?
Yep.
Yep. This is only my second Zoom meeting. We use Microsoft Teams at work and for other meetings, so I'm a bit of a novice at Zoom. Thank you for having me in this virtual meeting. Do you want, I mean, I could talk for the rest of the day about what's been going on over the last 2 months or so since I think I was there last, or was it just before that, since I was down seeing John. But I mean, obviously everyone knows that the financial markets have been in turmoil, have been in upheaval since, the COVID-19. I'll probably just summarise it. I've been in the financial markets now for 35 years, and just after I joined, we had the 87 share market crash. 10 years later, we had the Asian crisis in the late 90s. Then there was the tech wreck, when the tech stocks collapsed in the early 2000s. We had the global financial crisis in 2008, 9. Now we've had this. This is the most significant event that I've seen in 35 years, and it's had the most far-reaching consequences. It's more so than the global financial crisis. That was really just mainly related to financial institutions and their stability. And luckily, while I've been shored up, this one is just having an effect across the whole economy, but it's also, as well as having massive economic effects and financial market effects, it's having an effect on obviously the way that we live. So this is just way more significant. Well, it's more significant than the global financial crisis. Having said that, at this stage, the governments have realised the severity of it. Governments around the world, including New Zealand, have recognised the severity of the situation, and they've taken very significant steps to mitigate it by introducing these quantitative easing programs, by introducing support for banks' liquidity, for small businesses, in New Zealand, the wage subsidy. So at the moment, I mean, for a wee while ago, probably 2 or 3 weeks ago, I thought we were in danger almost of an economic Armageddon. It was just that bad. I think since then, the stability has returned to the market because they realise that the extent of the measures, both economic, financial and fiscal, governments and central banks have been applying, has actually been working, and it's provided stability to the system. But having said that, I mean, you'll see in the report that I wrote that if you compare interest rates at 31 March compared to where they were in 31 January, I mean, massive falls in those. The 90-day rate actually is showing in the report at 0.5, well, actually today it's 0.28. The markets are projecting, are implying an 84%, signing an 84% probability that the official cash rate will be at 0 by March next year, and the Westpac economist is predicting the OCR to be at the Reserve Bank to cut by now 75 points this year to take the OCR to -0.5. So in New Zealand, that would be unprecedented, obviously, having negative interest rates. Just going through the rest. I mean, I won't go through the report.
Miles,
You can, yeah.
Just while you're on the negative interest rates, what are the implications of that?
Okay. The implications is if you put money in the bank and you get a negative interest rate, then you get less back. But seriously, where it could impact you is, this gets a wee bit technical, but if we do some interest rate swaps to increase our level of interest rate cover, they could set below 0. So instead of being a receiver, it gets a bit complicated, instead of being a receiver of the 90-day rate on the swap, well, you're still a receiver, but because it's negative, you would actually be paying that away. Now, if you've got some floating rate debt, so since this report, we've taken out two tranches of CP. Under a bank facility, and I do apologise for this, I don't think there's any easier way I can explain it. Under a bank facility, bank base rates can't set below 0. So if rates go below 0, it actually increases your funding costs to the extent that rates are negative. But you don't have any bank debt at the moment. You've just got fixed rate bonds from the LGFA, and now you've got commercial paper, which is on a floating rate. As I understand it from the Reserve Bank, and from the LGFA, and I have asked them several times, their base rate on commercial paper or floating rate debt can reset below 0. So that means that you won't be affected by that negative. It means that you won't have an increased borrowing cost if rates go negative. But I do have to confirm that. I did it last year and they came back and sort of had a tentative yes, but they were exploring it. At this stage, I can't see the effect on you.
There's a scenario here where as a borrower, we can have increased borrowing costs as a consequence of negative interest.
It's possible if you have bank debt, but if you've got LGFA debt, I don't think that'll happen, no.
Likely. Okay, cool.
It's just a very unusual consequence of it's just a totally foreign concept, having negative interest rates, where if you put money in the bank, you get back less. Yeah. I've told you that, tell me if I'm repeating myself, I've told you that story what happened in Switzerland, didn't I? About the negative interest rates in the canton of Zug.
Don't recall.
A few years ago, because their rates are negative in Switzerland, so when I bank with my bank or they bank with their bank, they get a negative interest rate because their bank gets a negative interest rate with the Bundesbank with their central bank. With their central bank. So the canton of Zug, so that in effect, if they put money, if they have spare cash, they put it in their bank, they get a negative interest rate. So the canton of Zug actually wrote or emailed their ratepayers and asked for them not to pay their rates early. What they should have done, I suggested, was to offer a late payment discount. Pay your rates late and you'll get a discount. I don't think they'd take that up, but it's just a crazy sort of side effect of having negative interest rates that they specifically asked not to have their rates early, not to pay your rates early, because they'd get the negative interest rates in the bank.
Okay. So there seems some likelihood of negative interest rates becoming a reality, though?
Well, it's only been in the last 2 weeks that the Reserve Bank said back in, when did they drop the rate? In March, they said that they didn't believe that the 90-day rate wouldn't, the OCR would not go to zero. Since then, they've actually come back and retracted it and have said that they can't rule out negative interest rates. So they've softened their approach over the last 6 weeks or so, and now Westpac the Westpac economist is predicting a negative interest rate, that the OCR will be minus 0.5 by November this year. So they have softened their stance on that one.
Okay, before you move on, Brian's got a question.
Yeah, Miles, I was fortunate enough to sit in on the Nico Finance, got us in with a guy from Goldman Sachs, one of the big wigs there. He was talking of two trajectories for this. One was the negative interest rates and a slow grinding recession, and the other one was hyperinflation. What do we have to be looking, because I think everyone at the meeting will remember the 80s and the 24% interest rates. What do we have to be looking for that would indicate that we're heading towards hyperinflation rather than the zero interest that everyone seems to be taking, that's what's going to happen?
Yeah, we had those high interest rates back in the 80s. I think that was after the restrictions that Muldoon had in, and when Labor came into power, it was more of a free floating, a freely managed economy, whereas Muldoon, with it was it was managed by the government. As far as hyperinflation goes, as I understand it, and I'm not sure on this, but we had hyperinflation after the Great Depression, or during the Great Depression, when you had negative growth. So negative growth is 2 consecutive quarters of negative GDP growth, but you had inflation absolutely running away. So as I understand it, that is the definition of hyperinflation, is negative growth but massive inflation. The definition of a depression is, I just found this out the other day, was 2 years of consecutive, 2 years, so 8 consecutive quarters of negative GDP growth. Recession 2. I mean, I think we'll go, we will go into 2 quarters of negative GDP growth, but I mean, at the moment, you would almost have to see, for a recession, for a depression, you would almost have to see that economic Armageddon play out. You would have to see mass business failures. You'd see financial institutions perhaps going bankrupt or having to be bailed out by the government. I mean, after the Depression, banks, or during the Depression, banks had to be bailed out. But luckily now, the central banks around the world, and New Zealand was one of the first to do so, have actually shored up the banks, required the banks to hold more capital, so they are sounder. What we don't want here is for the housing market to collapse, because the banks, that's their biggest exposure. And if house prices collapse, their LVRs will go above 100%. So they'll own more than what the property's worth. They can sustain that in an ordinary time, but if then on top of that you got people losing their jobs and they can't pay their mortgage, that's when it gets very serious, because the bank would just have to think, okay, at what point do we bail out here, and they start foreclosing on mortgages. I don't think we're at it yet, but I mean, I think we'd have to see overall. I think you'd have to see the economy get even worse, and you'd have to see banks under pressure, and we could have hyperinflation, and we could have a depression. Does that sort of answer it?
Thank you.
Thanks, Miles. Back to your report. Sorry for interrupting.
One thing I think, without going through too much, but one thing that I think is important is just to explain how the LGFA have coped, with this funding crisis. Now, it was probably 3 weeks ago when the funding markets were drying up. Mark Butcher, who's the CEO of the LGFA, was incredibly good through that period. I mean, he rang just a nobody like me virtually every day to explain what was happening with the LGFA and the measures that they were taking. Obviously, hoping that I'd pass it on, because we have about 30 local authority clients. Probably the biggest, one of the biggest things is that they got the LGFA bonds included in the government's quantitative easing program. Now, under quantitative easing, the Reserve Bank buys bonds to try and suppress interest rates. So they don't want interest rates at the medium to long end of the yield curve spiking up. Short end of the yield curve, the OCR, that's just driven by Reserve Bank policy, and they stipulate what the OCR is. At the longer end, it's a bit freer, and it's more subject to market forces. But they have intervened, and they announced that they'd buy 30 billion of government bonds in the beginning, and then the LGFA lobbied them, and the Reserve Bank and Treasury and the Debt Management Office, and they got them to buy over the next course of a year to buy $3 billion worth of up to $3 billion of local LGFA bonds. So that will keep the rate down on them. The credit spreads for LGFA debt have gone up by sort of 30, 40 points since, so I'm just looking at it, just looking at that table, in the table on the local authority sector, you can see, well, it looks about 40 points or so, except at the long end where it's even longer, where it's even larger. So that shows the increase actually in the credit spreads. Looking at the April 25, I mean, it's 1.27%. Oh, sorry, it's not a typo in there, but I should have put the after it. But the tables, the numbers in brackets, this is 1.3, section 1.3, local authority sector. Sorry, I should have included that. That the numbers in the brackets are the credit spreads that applied is at 31 December. So that's
So can I just butt in there, Miles? Just what does the credit spread means? I've probably asked the question before and forgotten, but
so what the credit spread, an interest rate is made up of two components. It's the base interest rate, which is say your 90-day bank bill rate, or if you're doing a longer term fixed rate bond, it's the 3 or 5 year swap rate. The credit spread is the margin basically that investors will add on, or the investors require to invest in the bonds, to buy the bonds. The credit spread is exactly the same as a bank. You'll be familiar with bank debt and bank margins. It's the bond market equivalent of a bank margin. So to get an all-up interest rate, you add the credit spread, and then the applicable base rate, which if it's a floating rate note is the 90-day rate to get the all-up rate. So credit spreads will go up in times of economic uncertainty, economic stress, and normally interest rates will go down to compensate for that. So the natural reaction is in times like we have had at the moment, and this has happened in 2007, it's happened again, credit spreads have gone up, but underlying base rates have gone down, and actually the overall rate you can borrow at, and that table shows it, so it's in brackets, it's the rate or the margin that applied at 31 December. You can actually see that for all but the April 2033 bond, the all-up interest rate is actually lower now than it was at 31 December, but despite an increase in the credit spread. So the base rates have come down. So from a borrowing perspective, this crisis isn't costing you any more. In fact, it's costing you, to borrow, it's costing less.
Thank you.
So Bruce asked a question in email to you, John, about what the cost of our last drawdown was, what the interest rate. So what was the overall interest rate?
You there, John?
Yeah, I'm just trying to get the email up, unless you got it with you, Miles.
Yeah, I've got it written down, but I'm not sure if this is the base rate or the all-up rate. I've got for the 13 of October 20.8, and for the well, I don't know, probably it might be the spread, and 0.83 for the April 21. We got that there?
Yeah. So it's a 2 million of commercial paper maturing October 20 at a margin of 31 basis points, equating to an all-up rate of 0.8%.
Yeah.
And 2 million floating rate note at a margin of 83 basis points, equating to 1.265%.
So it's 0.8 and 1.26.
So,
yeah.
So there's 2 million at an all-up rate of 0.8%, less than 1%.
So
and then there's 2
why-
million at
Why is that so much
126.
lower than what's in the right-hand column on the table on 1.3?
It's a, let's see, it's a 3-month rate.
That was only a 3-month rate.
Oh no, 6 months. What am I saying? 6 months rate. The rate then was 1.19, but when you actually did it, I think the credit spread might have come in, but the base rate has actually come down. So it's based off the 6-month rate. Now that's probably fallen 30 points or so.
Yeah.
It was probably about 0.5, and now it's at 0.28 or 0.3. So it's the underlying base rate coming down. This one was 31 March, but you did it 2 weeks ago, and rates have fallen in the meantime. So you've got an average of the two of about 1.02% for 4 million.
Yeah, it's cheap, isn't it?
I mean, who would have ever thought that you'd be borrowing for 6 months at 0.8%?
Right, moving down the report.
That's that bit of it. Now, the report was 31 March, so it doesn't include those two. And we do have the debt and cover profile below that, which shows that there is a policy breach because you've got not enough cover from March 22 onwards, but the policy says that compliance on hedging parameters is not required if the debt is less than 5 million. We've sort of taken the view that, well, okay, we're right on 5 million, but so technically it's a breach, but with the possibility of debt levels increasing, the uncertainty because of the coronavirus, we just decided to delay it a little bit. Now, if I made this graph to 30 to now, to the end of April, would show that you've got 9 million of debt. So what we'll have to do is take out a couple of interest rate swaps. I haven't been sort of pushing it too much. I've been mindful of it, but just thinking with rates going down, and they're at all-time lows, they're lower than in this report. I just thought that it would be better to wait, and given that I might be being a bit pedantic there, but saying at 5 million, we technically don't have to do it. The intention is that we will get policy compliant by 30th of June, although it's not actually mandatory. I mean, as I understand it for the Local Government Act, that management can sanction a policy breach if they think that it's in the best interest of council. And we are looking, actually I need to talk to you about that, John, because I had an update. We're looking to get an interest rate swap dealing line with ANZ Bank, because you've got one with Westpac at the moment. It just means it puts competitive tension into the process and may well get you a lower rate if Westpac know that they're competing against another bank. They just need a stock security certificate, John, but I'll talk to you about that later.
So can I clarify, since this graph on page 4 of your report, page 72 of the agenda, since this graph was drawn, we've drawn down another $4 million.
Yeah.
Yeah. And have we fixed any of that?
No, that was floating.
That's all floating. So we're still in breach of the policy.
Yeah, so it's in breach of policy. As I say, technically at 5 we were, but we weren't. It is a breach now, but as I said, just with a few uncertainties around, I just wanted a little bit more clarity around where the future debt levels will be, and I'll be talking with John about it. It's because of the crisis. Has it precipitated further debt? Because that will have an effect on our funding, and that'll have an effect on whether we fund fixed or floating. That then will flow on to how many interest rate swaps we'll do. But as I said, the good thing is that waiting has actually proved to be beneficial for you, because we'll be doing it all-time historical low rates. If we'd done it at the time, the rates probably would have been 20 points higher swaps. Yeah. So we will have to carry out a couple of we will have to enter into an interest rate swap or two.
Yeah, I'll come to you in a second, Brian. So I want us to acknowledge that we're outside policy, and the delegations to this committee allow us to operate within policy. So we need to make a recommendation to council that they acknowledge that we're outside policy. When do you expect we will get back inside policy?
Oh, it'll be by 30 June.
By 30 June?
Unless I think that there's a compelling reason not to be. and I would send an email to John, which he would circulate to the committee.
Yep, thanks. Right, Brian.
What's our likely auditor's response to a breach?
They've probably got a whole lot of other things to worry about at the moment, from what I think auditors are looking at. As at 31 March, it was a technical breach because it says if your debt is less than 5 million. It's right on 5 million, so it's it's almost a line ball call. There won't be a breach by 30 June unless we note and sanction it. From other councils, I mean, as long as it's noted in a report, then I've never had them question it.
Yeah, my experience is, for one thing, Miles, it's at any point in time, it's on any day, and those people monitoring our treasury should be aware of it. And then it comes down to delegations and things like that. What happens is when it all turns to custard, the first thing Audit New Zealand do is go and look at your policy, and when the West Coast investment turned to custard, the report was full of statements about breach of policy and operating outside policy. So where we protect ourselves is acknowledging it and making a decision whether we think it's prudent or not to continue on, and that's I think so long as we do that. Technically, probably it's a Section 80 issue in terms of a decision outside of policy, and we just acknowledge that, and that just shows that we considered that it was a prudent and sensible thing to do in the meantime. In a scenario where interest rates suddenly went up, then effectively our cost of debt by not having it fixed at this lower interest rate time would be higher, and hopefully that's not going to happen. Steve, you want to say something?
Sorry. Yeah.
I was just going to say, just following on from what you're saying, Mr. Chairman, I think, Miles, we just need some form of memo so that we can act on it, as you say. So we're aware of policy breach. What's the reasoning? What's the the proposition in that sense, so that we can come to so we can give a proper consideration to it. Sure. And yes, whilst we've sort of benefited from it in that sense, I think moving forward, we probably need to have that ability to get the memorandum early, and the suggestion as to why we wouldn't potentially act, because it's to our advantage, as you've suggested, earlier, and then we can get just cover that. We can still do it in retrospect. I think we still need it, as the chairman has said. And we just need some form of your analysis so that we can then work through the decision process to be able to make it happen, or sorry, to cover ourselves from a policy perspective as a result. Because there'll be some options in that, but we just haven't seen it yet, obviously.
I won't get it done tomorrow, but next week I'll just send through an update of the debt and cover profile. Note that it's outside of policy, and note that these are the remedial actions that we can take to get within policy.
Yeah, that's good. Thanks, Steve. Just for elected members, these sorts of breaches, I've seen them before. They're quite common. It's not an unusual thing. I've seen breaches go the other way, where council have had more debt than they need because the engineers didn't spend up as quickly as finance guys.
They have more fixed rate cover than they have debt.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. John.
Miles, I'm sorry, Stephen. Sorry, Mr. Chairman, just checking. Miles, when you're putting that report together and you're saying, here's the options, obviously you'll be putting recommendations or some analysis of the options for us.
Yeah, so I'll say this is the option, that this is what you could do. And I'll talk to John about what your future debt requirements are, because they will have an impact on what we do, and it'll have an impact on the recommendation. So I'll get an idea of that. I'll give you a ring probably tomorrow or Monday, John. And it'll say, look, if you take out some swap, this is how you can remedy it. If you're having more debt, you can take out a fixed rate bond, or you could do a swap, or you can continue within the policy breach. There'll be about 3 different options, I would imagine. 3 alternatives that you could look at. Just one thing you might. Sorry.
I just wanted to go back to the audit question. It's an internal policy breach. It's not an external statute breach. So, you know, the implications from an audit perspective, it may be a management-led point. It's definitely never going to hit the audit opinion.
Yeah.
So
That's
I'm not
the
worried.
way I understood it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right,
Just
you might be interested to know that I haven't done the cost of funds with this latest debt, but it will be about 2.2. So I won't try and do it in my head while I'm on a Zoom meeting, but it'll be it'll be well below, it could be 1.5% or so. That would make you the local authority in New Zealand with the lowest cost of funds that I'm aware of, and we know where quite a few of them are. So you'll be at about 1.5. Just to give you I know some local authorities who have got their hedging totally wrong, which Stephen was describing earlier. Their cost of funds is over 5%.
Yeah.
We have an average for our local government clients of about 3.3, 3.4. But the reason why you're lower is because you haven't got as much legacy historical debt at higher rates. So, but pat yourselves on the back for having that anyway. I mean, it's an accolade that you could share with other local authorities when you're socialising with them or at a meeting. I'll work it out and I'll actually send it to John and Stephen so they can circulate it around. I can do it pretty quickly. I'll do it today after the meeting.
Right, thanks, Mo. Any further questions before we move on? Bruce, Whawala. Mike, on your mic. Bruce, turn your mic off. On.
Thank you, got it. With the cost of borrowing being so low now, I'm thinking this is a good time to go in and borrow more and replace our internal debt and put our and go and invest what our internal, swap it for our internal debt and invest that money and borrow at the lower rate. Looks like perhaps 2%, whirling around in my head, and to the advantage of our rate payers in the medium term. I'd just wonder if you've got a comment on that, or anybody else just got any comments on that.
I got about 3/4 of that. It was sort of breaking in and out. Did everyone else hear it properly, or?
I'll repeat that. Sorry, my internet's a bit unstable. We've got about,
I think I've got it. Yeah.
$25 million invested in ourselves at the moment in internal debt. So can we replace that externally and put that $25 million into our investments?
Okay, yeah, it did break up again, but I mean, I think I've got the gist of what you were saying. My suggestion would be, I would be reluctant to do that because you've already got 25 million exposed to fluctuations in investment markets, and I imagine that your return for the March quarter would have been a negative return. Is that right?
No, it's about for the quarter, yes.
For the quarter, yeah. If you borrowed
for the year.
If you borrowed another 20 million or so and put it into the markets, given the volatility that we've got and what the possible outcome could be, I mean, I just think that's too much risk for the council to take on, to have 50 million subject to changes in valuations and diminishing returns and values in the investment markets. It is possible to perhaps borrow some money from the LGFA and then invest it with a bank and make a positive return on it. I think we got rates for 6 months yesterday. I'm just trying to think, yesterday or the day before, for a local authority of about 2.3% for 6 months. So you can borrow and make roughly 1%.
And in the instance that we're about to go and boost our capital spend in the next few years as part of the recovery thing, maybe that's a scenario that could be considered.
Well, that's something I can put down in another memo too, just saying, look, if once I know what those future debt levels are, if I just get when John and I get together and decide what those, or John lets me know what those debt levels are, then we can say, well, actually, this is called a pre-funding strategy. And so if you actually pre-fund, then you could lock in the low interest rate now, and then you could put it out to say a 6 or 9 or 12-month term, and you can make a positive carry. So in other words, you would receive more, the interest rate that you receive on the investment will be higher than what you're borrowing at. But I think putting it into the investment markets at the moment, especially being subject to equities, New Zealand, Australian offshore equities, is that would be fraught with danger, I think, at the moment, and could sort of open you up a bit to some media comment, even possibly, which you want to avoid.
How is that viewed, borrowing money from the LGF in a bank? Does the LGFA have an opinion on that, or are they quite happy for accountants
I think I got most of that. Actually, I probably missed out a point here, and it's a very good point. I should have brought it up. One thing the LGFA did 3 or 4 weeks ago, when they had this last tender, or it was a syndication where they raised money, they went out to local, because it has been quite widespread. Now, I don't have a problem with doing it if it's valid and if it's a legitimate pre-funding strategy. In other words, you've got identified future debt, you just want to take advantage of interest rates now, and so you go out and borrow it, but because you don't need it for a wee while, you go and put it on the in term deposit. The LGFA were actually asking people not to pre-fund if possible, because the credit markets were tight, and they wanted to they just wanted borrowing to be legitimate, and to be based on absolutely necessary funding that was required, not to do a pre-funding strategy. So it's a very good point, Bruce, actually. Ordinarily it would be okay, but at the moment, and there's the LGFA, the funding position has increased, but has improved, because they issued $1 billion worth of April 26 bonds 2 weeks ago. So their liquidity position is fine, their funding position is fine, but they are going around some of the bigger councils, especially, and saying, what are your requirements over the next 6 months? And they did put out in one of those, in the borrower email that I get, which that table is based off, and they ask people to only to borrow for legitimate borrowing reasons and not as a pre-funding strategy. So yeah, I should have mentioned that earlier, so great point.
Right, no more questions?
Okay.
Thank you, Miles, for your informative discussion. So I want to modify the resolution. So there's a resolution to receive the report, and Karen has this, that the committee notes the breach in policy with regard to the fixed portion of debt, and the committee recommends to council that the council accept the breach as prudent at this time, and that this will be rectified with the next forecast drawdown. Steve has asked for some advice before that goes to council, but I think we can still go with that without modifying that wording. Okay with that, John? Steve?
Yes, sorry, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, I was only talking about not the technical breach at the report writing stage, which was for the 5 million, which is what I think the resolution is talking about. Obviously, post that is what we are now looking at in terms of, and we've had a drawdown post the report, which again will be a breach, but we're looking to be okay with that by 30th of June. So Miles is doing the work on the drawdown related information and the options associated with that. But in respect of this resolution and this report, you're only dealing with the technical breach.
A breach is a breach.
Yes, but your resolution is fine, is what I'm saying. Is
all right.
But you're not looking at it forward wise. That's what Miles is doing now.
Okay, I see.
Yeah.
Okay. So with that recommended change in the addition to the resolution to receive the report, do I have a mover and seconder? Moved Bruce Fowler, seconded Ken. Thank you, Ken. All those in favour? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Thank you. All those against, carried. Thank you, Miles.
Thank you. Well, hopefully the next time that we have this meeting, I'll be able to do it in person.
Yeah.
We're back to normality. Actually, as I said, and I can change it actually if you like. I should have put it in the report. Oh no, since the report, you have the lowest borrowing cost. So in the next report at the end of June, I'll actually mention that you have the lowest borrowing cost of any local authority in New Zealand that we're aware of.
Okay, thanks for that.
Give you bragging rights anyway. Hey, thanks
Right.
for your time.
Thanks.
Thanks, Miles.
Thanks.
John, Risk and Assurance Committee work program.
Yes, Chair. What I did is I did move one of the items that were in April to May, the rating the billing, because we couldn't do any work on that.
Yeah.
So that, other than that, I'll take it as read. We're going to discuss the audit engagement letter with Deloitte just now. So yeah.
Yeah. Right. Can I have a mover and a seconder, please? Thank you, Alison. Moved. Seconded. Thank you, Bruce Viola. All those in favour? All those against? Carried. And that takes us to the resolution to go public excluded. If I can have a mover. Thank you, Alison. Seconded, John. All those in favour? Sorry, was someone wanting to discuss? No. All those in favour? One, two, three, four, five, six, seven. Thank you. All those against, carried. So we're going public excluded. If someone can shut the door.